Hi guys. So when I left off yesterday, Omri was just about to put the Indian on the ground. He was afraid that he was going to fall off the edge of his, I think it was his nightstand next to his bed. So we'll pick up where we left off here. The Indian took no chances. Lying on his stomach, he crawled, commando style, to the edge of the chest of the drawers and peered over. "Big mountain," he commented at last. "Well," but it seemed too difficult to explain. "May I lift you down?" Little Bear stood up and looked at Omri measuringly. "Not hold tight?" he asked. "No, I won't hold you at all. You can ride in my hand." He laid his hand palm up next to Little Bear, who, after only a moment's hesitation, stepped into it, and for greater stability, sat down cross-legged. Omri gently transported him to the floor. The Indian rose lithely to his feet and jumped off onto the gray carpet. Once he began to look about with suspicion. He dropped to his knees, felt the carpet, and smelled it. "Not ground," he said, "blanket." "Little Bear, look up." He obeyed, narrowing his eyes and peering. "Do you see the sky or the sun?" The Indian shook his head, puzzled. "That's because we're not outdoors. We're in a room. In a house big enough for people my size. You're not even in America. You're in England." The Indian's face lit up. "English, good. Iroquois fight with English against French." "Really?" asked Omri, wishing he had read more. "Did you fight?" "Fight? Little Bear fight like a mountain lion. Take many scalps." "Scalps," Omri swallowed. "How many?" Little Bear proudly held up all 10 fingers, then closed his fists, opening them again with another lot of 10, and then another. "I don't believe you hurt so many people," said Omri, shocked. Little Bear not lie, great hunter, great fighter. "Any white scalps?" Omri ventured to ask. "Some, French. Not take English scalps. Englishmen friends to Iroquois. Help Indian fight Algonquin enemy." Omri stared at him. He suddenly wanted to get away. "I'll go and get you some meat," he said in a choking voice. He went out of his room, closing the bedroom door behind him. For a moment he did not move on, but leaned back against the door. He was sweating slightly. This was a bit more than he had bargained for. Not only was his Indian no mere toy that came to life, he was a real person, somehow magicked out of the past over 200 years ago. It occurred to Omri for the first time that his idea of Indians, taken entirely from Western films, had been somehow false. After all, those had all been actors playing Indians, and afterwards wiping their war paint off and going home for dinners, not in teepees, but in houses like his. Little Bear was no actor. Omri swallowed hard. 30 scalps. Phew! Of course, things were different in those days. Those tribes were always making war on each other, and when you came to think of it, the English and the French, whatever they thought they were doing, fighting in America, were probably no better, killing each other like mad as often as they could. Even now, there weren't soldiers doing the same thing? I read that wrong. Let me start that over. Even now, weren't soldiers doing the same thing? Weren't there wars and battles and terrorism going on all over the place? You couldn't switch on television without seeing news about people hurting and killing other people and being killed. Were 30 scalps, even including French ones, taken hundreds of years ago, so very bad after all? Still, when he tried to imagine Little Bear full-size bent over some French soldier holding his hair in one hand and running the point of his knife along his scalp, yuck. Omri pushed away the door and walked rather unsteadily downstairs. No wonder he had felt from the first slightly afraid of the Indian. He asked himself, swallowing repeatedly and feeling that just the same he might be sick, whether he wouldn't do better to put Little Bear back in the cupboard, lock the door, and turn him back into plastic, knife and all. Down in the kitchen, he ransacked his mother's store cupboard for a tin of meat. He found some corned beef at last and opened it with a tin opener on the wall. He dug a chunk out with a teaspoon, put it absently into his own mouth, and stood there chewing it. The Indian hadn't seemed very surprised about being in a giant house in England. He had shown that he was very superstitious, believing in magic and in good and evil spirits. Perhaps he thought of Omri, well, as some kind of a genie, or whatever Indians believed instead. The wonder was that he wasn't more frightened of him, for genies or giants or spirits or whatever were always supposed to be powerful. Omri supposed that if one happened to be the son of an Indian chief, one simply didn't get scared as easily as ordinary people, especially perhaps if one had taken 30 scalps. Maybe Omri ought to tell someone about Little Bear. The trouble was, although grown-ups usually knew what to do, what they did was seldom what children wanted to be done. What if they took the Indian to, say, some scientist, whoever knew about strange things like that, who would question him and examine him and probably keep him in a laboratory or something of that sort? They would certainly want to take the cupboard away, too, and Omri wouldn't be able to have any more fun with it at all. Leave off right there for today. There was some pretty heavy stuff in there, part of history. Unfortunately, there's been some wars and different cultures have had different practices, and there was some stuff in there that's probably a little gruesome, but that's part of history. So I went ahead and read that. You guys, try to finish up chapter 3 tomorrow. Hopefully there'll be enough time. I don't want to make these too long, but we'll keep on going because the story really starts to get interesting as he starts to meet some other characters. So have a good night. Take care of yourselves.